Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Renewables Podcast. And thank you very much for coming back. We've been going a little while now, haven't we, Mark?
We have. I was saying in a little WhatsApp chat earlier this week that it was 6 months, 20 odd episodes in.
Yeah.
We know it's getting back round towards winter because I've got my coat on and it's starting to get cold back here.
Yeah.
We're in for a tough one, I think.
Yeah, no, it's good. So that milestone has been breached. So, firstly, thanks to everybody that has supported us so far, has been watching, has been sharing, has been talking to us personally and publicly about it. It's fantastic, and I'm very glad to still be sat here with Mark. So, Mark, how are you doing? How's everything been today?
Yeah, it's been good, mate. We've back on with surveys and stuff. I think we've both been doing a bit of that this week.
Yeah.
They're always nice, but it's work into the distant future, and sometimes it feels like it's not as productive a use of time as it could be. But yeah, loving it. What about you?
Yeah, all good. It's just been another joyous week in renewables, and we were just talking before this, weren't we? That everything you kind of do in renewables is kind of is paying forward by like a couple of months. So when you do that survey, you've got to go for all the DNO. I've had a load of jobs that have required planning permission, and so everything you do, like the surveys, the replies to emails, everything like that, just seems to be paying it forward into a couple of months. So yeah, no, it's exciting to get towards Christmas and look into the new year.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it, isn't it? It's all good fun with little kids, especially at Christmas in the private life of things. And there's lots of interesting things for contractors to still get involved with before the end of this year. I've mentioned before we came on air, mentioning the CEF Tech Talks. So if you've not registered for those yet, there's a few running between now and I think it's the end of November-ish. I'm going to be going to the one in Sheffield, and we've got Sandown Park as well, I think, for the Elect Show. And for those of you over in Northern Ireland, there's the ETT event as well, which I'm going to be going to. So there's a few exciting things where you can go off and get involved with that. And CEF are obviously a big part of the sponsors of this show. So Proteus, that's another reason for giving it a mention. And before we carry on, I suppose we should hear a little bit about Proteus for the sponsor read in this week's episode. Just to interject today's show, we want to speak to you about another awesome product from Proteus, and that is the Type B RCBO that they've just brought out, Sam. We saw that in person on the podcast we did with Proteus, and again, it's helping us as installers, isn't it?
Oh, it's unbelievable how they have managed to engineer it to fit it all within a single module. I remember fitting the ones that are about 3 or 4 modules wide. How they've managed to engineer that into one module is an absolute... I don't know how they've done it, but it's fantastic that they have.
They have, and it's bi-directional as well. So again, thinking of us as installers for those PV and EV systems. And that is why we are so proud and honoured to be sponsored by Proteus on the Renewables Podcast. But let's get back to the show. So that's it for the sponsor read this week. And I did ask a little question over on Instagram, pre-recording this with Sam, if anyone had any topics they'd like us to discuss. And the hot topic of social media that has been the case for several months now, maybe even a year, is outdoor consumer units. And that was one of the questions that came in. There was another interesting one I'll mention at the end of this show. And yes, just the challenges we face in renewal. I think we're front line to all this, Sam, because I see it so often when we're going out surveying and customers say, well, others have proposed an outdoor fuse box. Do you get that as well?
All the time. And even if you're the first one there, you find out that through other contractors that have gone there that they've proposed an outdoor consumer unit. And if you've got on particularly well with that customer, sometimes you get that feedback from them to go, oh, well, just wanted your opinion on, they've come back £1,000 cheaper or whatever, but they're proposing to put a consumer unit on the outside of my house. It's obviously going to save me £1,000, but, would you consider doing the same thing? Because I like to think that we get, as a company, a good rapport with customers, kind of show our honesty and experience, but money talks, doesn't it? And I think that's one of the driving forces for this outdoor consumer unit thing, and it's kind of a problem that we've not really seen before. It's kind of one of those problems that popped up. There's a lot of interesting chat about it. Some of it positive, some of it not, some of it divisive, but I think a lot of people just are stuck in the middle of trying to find out what to do, really.
Yeah, there's such a lot of that. People just want to know, is that an actual workable solution or isn't it? And, it first started to become a thing with EV chargers, didn't it? That was like manufacturers getting involved with installing systems were looking for simple, cost-effective ways. And then the manufacturers out there try and meet that demand. So they try and innovate to solve a problem. This is something that's ingrained with housing stock. New builds in a particular problem, but even older homes, certainly in the towns around where we are now, in Hull and York, a lot of the main incoming supplies in terraced homes are under the stairs in the middle of the house, and they're not easy places to get cables back to when you're installing equipment down the end of someone's garden or miles away from that. And there's the extra and additional costs. Obviously, we've had the guidance from the IET now. A good friend of mine, Craig O'Neill, authored that. It's a brilliant article. I think he's looked at both sides of that, both in terms of safety and the cost and the implications towards safety, and what we can actually do or not do as installers. It's I think it's been well received by industry as well. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it, but lots of people are saying actually that's a really good oversight of the problem.
Yeah, it was, because with it being such a hot topic, and I read it and I was waiting for that killer line or that that almost like personal opinion to come out of it. But you have to obviously remember that the IT there is there to kind of display the information. So in some cases come to a conclusion, but ultimately, I believe it says it was either in the article or it was in the comments following the article that we're still the information in the article is only backed up with evidence that's around, and because it is quite a new phenomenon in electrics, there's not a lot of evidence there to say that it's good or bad. This is just kind of drawing on the sections of the article about design, about IP ratings, about temperature, about all these different things, and trying to, what I thought the article was really good at was breaking that down. So it wasn't just a massive page of text, it was broken down into the considerations that Craig had made on that article. And I think we need more of that, where it's you can see, I could almost, when I was reading it, I could almost hear the cogs turning as to go, right, this is the first thing I considered, this is the next thing, this is the next thing, this is the next thing. And so I thought it was a really well written article, and it's exactly what the industry needed to try and it wasn't a conclusion, but it was an intellectual chat about the real considerations broken down section by section as to what an electrical designer, which we all are, that have got your own companies, or that if you're an employee of a company but you are designing the systems, you are effectively taking responsibility for that. And you can't know everything yourself, and this isn't a witch hunt against electricians that are doing that. It's a case of collectively we need to make sure that we're learning from everything that's happening in industry, and sometimes I feel like innovation can overtake the regulation because it's so much harder to get that regulation approved, written and approved and adopted, but innovation can just be snappy, can't it? So I thought it was a really good article, and hopefully look forward to having a chat to him.
Yeah, I mean, it's the last paragraph in that for me where it's the option of last resort, and I think that's fair. I think most installers would view it as that. And you're dead right, Sam, with the innovation of things. These things come out and you just start, oh, that's a good idea, and it starts getting done. And it's maybe only down the line where people think, hang on, is this something that is meeting the intent of all of our regulations? Do we need to think about this a little bit more? And I think that's definitely the case with the outdoor switchgear. And I don't blame installers for ending up fitting this stuff. That's never been kind of my angle on it. It's always been about the topic of, should we be doing it? Is it actually safe? Is there issues there for consumers? And there's a lot of installers out there who've built businesses in the EV space, especially installing these equipment. Throughout the course of a day, they've got a few guys or girls out doing it, and all of a sudden, disruptors have come to the market, and they're doing it at volume with outdoor consumer units, and they're not competitive anymore. So it's a case of lose your business or adapt and start doing the same thing. And it's not so much the race to the bottom is the tag that's put on all of that, but sometimes that's not what it is. It's just trying to stay relevant and competitive in a market space you would otherwise have to leave and potentially lay people off, shrink your business and all the rest of it. Is that what we really want? I don't think it is. It's not what I want anyway.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any shame in the fact of changing tact and going, you know what, I was doing that, and now I know more information about what could potentially happen. I know in the past I fitted some outdoor switchgear like that, an outdoor consumer unit, because where this consumer unit was, it was actually on the other side of the wall, but it was in a kitchen unit. It was an old rewirable board, but the kitchen unit was literally like the size of the width of the consumer unit, and it was down. It was just horrendous. Like, you'd have to dismantle the full kitchen to do it. And so we fitted an outdoor consumer unit, and being honest here, because I don't want to lie to anybody on this, I'd never even crossed my mind about the temperature. I obviously kind of respected the fact that water can get into it if there's loads of holes in it, but the whole temperature side of thing, the pen fault side of things, it honestly never even crossed my mind. I was just like, this is literally my only option to get this. It was a solar and battery storage system in, and that was an outdoor consumer that is being sold as an outdoor consumer. And I think in the world of business and family and everything else, you kind of, when you have a product that is, and this is probably a fault of some of the manufacturers out there, but when you've got a product there that is being marketed and has got on the box outdoor consumer unit, that your brain kind of attaches to that and goes, perfect, that's an awesome solution. I've got this job that would be mint for. And sometimes that skips the electrical part of your brain, which is actually going, well, we need to think of all these different elements. And because as soon as your brain's gone, that's what we're using, you're then on to thinking about the next job or the materials. And so I think as the temperature cools down a little bit on this argument, hopefully as more guidance comes out, in other installers like myself that have done this in the past can kind of go, you know what, I'm going to change how I do that. And I'm not gonna, feel any sort of, necessarily any guilt for that. It's more of a learning process to go, you know what, yeah, I'm probably better off not doing it like that anymore. But it's difficult when you're trying to juggle everything.
No, I mean, exactly that. Being able to admit when you're wrong or learn from things is such a key strength. And sometimes in the debate of things, certainly around this topic, there seems to be these camps of one side or another where neither one's prepared to accept that they might be wrong in certain areas and have that conversation. And yeah, that's when the topic loses. It's moved away from that stage. So I'm keen with what we're doing here to try and stay with that. And Craig's been good enough, just to mention early on in this episode, so you can fire your questions in, to answer some questions for us. He would have come up and done a podcast, but he lives right on the south coast, as good as in France. He couldn't be any further away if he tried. So we're going to draft some questions out to put to Craig, and we want to bring you guys and girls into that as well. So if you've got any specific things that you'd like the author of that article to cover off, he's put himself forward to do so. We're going to edit a few things together, and if there's some suggestions that come from the audience, they can be in that mix as well. So it's your chance to have a bit of input in that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I would say to people is that is the questions you can obviously ask whatever you want, and it'll be up to Craig to decide if he wants to answer those things, but you have to remember what he's representing. If you ask a question of, should I fit a outdoor consumer unit, or are they banned? He's not going to answer that. He's not going to say they are banned, because his capacity isn't there to tell you what you need to do. His capacity is there to present the evidence. So I would have a look at the article, which we'll probably, can we put that on the bottom of this
description? Yeah.
We'll put the article in the notes for this podcast. But if you haven't read it already, or if you have read it and you want to refresh yourself, which I'll be doing before I finish my questions, have a look at the breakdown of the article and just try and pick some information out of that you want clarifying, because they're the sort of questions I think that he could probably answer. But the answer of, can we fit them, is not going to answer that, or he will answer it, but he'll just say it's up to the electrical designer. It's a method of last resort, like he's put on the article. So have a little look at the article and pull some questions from it. But feel free to send in whatever you like, and we will go through it and present the questions to him, and then on hopefully a podcast very soon we'll get that on here, and we can discuss it. And go through those questions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing for the IET to be doing. There's lots of chatting industry about these organisations don't get involved in these conversations. They just ignore them and turn a blind eye. This is a big topic. They've jumped in, they're having their say, and they've opened it up via our podcast to a wider audience as well, who may not have seen their article on the IET Wiring Matters. It is Wiring Matters if you've not seen it. Google that and it'll be the last article they've released. I think there's some other absolute corkers on there as well. But the actual topic of itself, I think there's a few key areas of that. One is to do with the way we're still building houses now. That's something we can avoid right now. We could change the way we're designing and building homes to make this not be an issue. We could absolutely do that. There's the challenge of older housing stock, stuff that's already out there where we've got to try and rework and do the best for our consumers. And then there's some of the topics around it, like pen faults. There was a freedom of information request that's come back. I can't remember who submitted it, but it's shown a decline in the number of reported incidents of pen faults. And injuries from them, I think, then they're next to zero. So the whole pen fault protection, argument, as we're growing that from just electric vehicles potentially into wider things within a domestic dwelling, at the very least, is that even really necessary? Are pen faults that much of a big deal? The data's showing a decline. Is the DNO of things taking a hard rep for how they're maintaining their systems? If it's something that's very, very unlikely to occur, do we need to worry about it, basically? It's the short story. It's that scale of risk, as Neil Bridgman often references to. We can engineer out absolutely every single risk to anything, but it costs so much money, will take so much time, it becomes beyond economically achievable. And that's where it is with pen faults as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's raised a really good point, and I think what can happen sometimes is that the conversation around a topic can exacerbate it in such great proportions that everyone thinks that everyone's going to die from a pen fault and that they're everywhere, which it's definitely something that needs to be looked at and monitored and protected against, as much as we can. But you're right in that. Does that mean, at what cost does that have to be mitigated against? Is that, people's every electrical installation that is putting something metal outside to be, have a pen fault protection device on it? Is there additional, does the whole house need something like that in the meter box? It's how far do you take it? And I think looking above that argument and the conversation certainly on social media, it tends to be, because it's so easy to have an opinion on it and to back others' opinions on it, and it kind of all snowballs into this massive thing. But I think there is a real value in taking things back to the data on how often this stuff is actually happening. And obviously, as more TNS suppliers are getting TNCS and all this and PME'd and everything, that's, it may well rise as more of those connections are being converted. But I think we need to keep the conversation going, which is what this podcast is all about, but also keep referring back to the data on how bad is this in reality. And that might be dropping because people are starting to talk about it, and so people are taking more of an interest. There isn't loads of cars out there that are sat without any, pen fault protection devices on it. Without that conversation, would that have happened? And all this sort of stuff, it's hard to know why that is so low, because the whole PME earthing system is it's exploding, and that's what they all are pretty much. Even, I think, is it in the next guidance they're on about? I listened to something at the Elex show in Coventry where they were saying that basically in the next amendment, and I'm only guessing here from trying to recall it after a late night, that basically if you see what looks to be a TNS earthing system in a property, it should just be assumed it's TNCS because it might be PME, in the street somewhere. So if we're going to that, that's going to increase the amount of PME earthing connections there is in the UK. So that risk is going to probably increase because there's more chances for that that pen fault to happen. So, but I think keeping an eye on that data would be very, very important. But also keeping the conversation going, but hopefully in a constructive way.
Yeah, I mean, the data is without the data, we're just all guessing, and we've got some data now that's been provided by the DNO of things, and they keep good records of the faults they have on their network, and it's a small percentage of some of the other faults that they encounter day to day. We do have a really robust supply of electricity in the UK. It's not infallible. There are times when it goes down. Faults do happen. I think in the near 30 years now I've been doing this, we've come across 2 pen faults, maybe 3, in all that time. And we've worked in the domestic sector for a long time, and there's always loss of supply at DNO level. Usually it's just that. It's all supply gone, not due to a pen fault. But it's not impossible to happen. And with big electric vehicles that are generally isolated from massive earth, it makes sense. My issue with it at the minute, if we're deciding that is a big enough problem, we shouldn't then be pointing people at metal switchgear outside. But I do accept that that is a really, really low issue. And if we actually look at the regulations today, this is where the shall and should in terms of regulations come into it. But we've been directed to fit earth electrodes on PME systems anyway as a should. This is something, people call it a recommendation, but the actual definition is we should do that. So on any install we're going to do some work, be that adding new circuits, changing a consumer unit, there's a consideration there to add an earth electrode to a PME install anyway, which kind of mitigates the risk of pen faults in the circumstances of an outdoor consumer unit. Now, where those lines get blurred is the whole invention of pen fault detection was to avoid driving earth electrodes.
Yeah.
That's why we brought them out. That's what the default approach when EV charging first came out, was you would run a radial circuit and put an earth rod in for that circuit. That's how we got around that problem. Then manufacturers were like, well, that is a bit dangerous in urban areas. Driving stakes in all over the place isn't the greatest thing to be doing due to the risk of hitting stuff in the ground. We can probably innovate something to remove that problem. But the regulations of things are saying, well, we should be doing that. And we know from the world of renewables and islanding, we need electrodes anyway. So on a setup we're doing, speaking about a system of ours, in terms of the pen fault aspect and the metallic enclosure outdoors, it's not really that much of a problem in what we're doing. As a summary of that particular instance of concern with all of that.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant breakdown, and I think that's always been it's unbelievable how often we try and innovate around a problem, but we end up going back to the general the general practices of driving earth rods. Driving earth rods in has been happening for long before both of us lot have been doing electrics, and it'll continue into the future and probably will become more common. And I seem to remember, I can't remember where I heard it, but they wanted to be a lot stronger on the earth rod installation on PME supplies of basically requiring everybody to fit them if they're on PME supplies. But it presented such a challenge to people like living in flats and all these other things that it was more of a, you say like I'm going to fall into that trap of recommendation, but we still should be really really doing this. And like you mentioned, on a lot of solar and battery installations, we are kind of by default doing that anyway if they're having backup systems, so we're kind of compliant to that. And then we're kind of going, well, okay, well, are we also almost solving a problem there with the pen fault side of things, but we're connecting our earth electrodes, we're still connecting that into that system, so we're not removing the possibility of a pen fault happening, but we are giving it another path. And yeah, it's all a bit murky really as to exactly how, and this is why this problem hasn't been solved overnight, because there are so many factors to it, which are really interesting to chat about. And I'm excited to chat to Craig about all this, because he's going to be in for a good session of us asking questions.
There'll be a lot on that. I mean, and the earth electrodes driving them into the ground is just the default example. There's other options. There's conji discs, there's grids that you can put in. We used to do work back in the day on RAF masts, and they would put a big grid in. It wasn't even buried that deep, an earth grid. So there's options of not having to drive too deep into the ground for us to get around that problem. But the next side of it, I suppose, is moisture through condensation and cable entry. And the big problem lots of people have with outdoor consumer units is they don't generally come with the glands in. And as soon as we put glands into that enclosure, it needs testing again as a whole thing to determine if it is suitably IP rated for use in that environment. And that's the grey area, I think, with manufacturers using IP65 enclosures That's then putting it on us as installers to ensure we maintain that. And other ones that call them outdoor consumer units, that's kind of saying that this is suitable at all times for use in that application. And they can make suggestions around cable entries and things, but that's what they're actually saying. So that's the difference there. And if you look at gateways, so we look at a Give Energy gateway or the SIG Energy gateway, they come with glands in, and they're saying they're IP65, that they can go outside. Some of them want consideration of a shelter going over it to keep snow off them and stuff, but they've tested it for that. They've got heat sinks in it, they've got condensate valves in them, and they're happy with it being used in that application, and we're told not to make new cable entries into it. They're all in there. They're in the back already. They're in the bottom already. Use those. We've tested it for that application. So I think that's the subtle difference there. And if you were to put a metal box outside with warm RCBOs in it that are generally running overnight for 7 or 8 hours, they're going to get warm. The metal case is cold. Condensation's going to form. So you need to cover those things off. And, we've had the same thing as you, Sam, in the past where it's been unavoidable. It's been that option of last resort. And we've put GRP boxes around with heaters and little fans in to try and keep the environment around the consumer unit stable and take, I think they call it the macro environment, to a separate area outside of the consumer unit. And that's been our solution to that problem. But it's not low cost, it's not easy, and it's design consideration that involves more thought than I would have given it in my 20s doing electrical work. This is something, when I've been in the game a bit of a while and seen the commercial side of things where you have your green pillars and some of the condensation that can form. In my earlier career, I wouldn't have had sight of that. I'd have seen an outdoor fuse box and just fitted one. I'm quite happy to admit that. You don't know what you don't know. So that's kind of the condensation and moisture side. And I think as designers, as long as you cover that off, there's ways around it. You can oversize your cabling, set your breakers right for the temperature as well. So there's workarounds there. And the last bit of it all is to do with new build and trying to stop it being a problem at source, because it is so avoidable. And I've got an example to share that I've put on my social media the last week or two of a brand new house. They moved in February 2024. The garage is a double garage, detached from the house, quite a distance away, and they've taken over a 2.5 mil 16 amp circuit to it. Is it beyond reasonable to assume at some point that somebody might want to charge an electric vehicle in there? And the meter box has got a steel wire armour submain in it, glanded off with a 10B clamp. You've got the service isolator of the supplier, and then a switch fuse covering off that submain. So you're already fighting against it. The consumer unit in the middle of the house, floors are all tiled, house is finished. Customer don't want that ripping apart. What are your options? You've got the ENA saying you can't use the meter cupboard for any space. I'm like, that's an unacceptable response for me right now. There's a smart meter in there. There's 2 isolators in there. I'm going to use that space because that's how we're solving that problem. I think electricians need to have confidence in being able to make those decisions sometimes as designers.
Yeah, I think you just need to. You have to be pragmatic with some of this stuff, and that's why installers that use outdoor consumer units, like I have in the past, there's 2 that I've used. One was metal, one was plastic, and both of those, in my view, were a method of last resort. They could have been done better. Now, with hindsight and all of this guidance and everything that's out there, and this conversation has driven, and I've learned a lot from that. But I think the whole thing around how these new builds are set up, it's like the way I see this, right, is the way new builds are set up is the cause, and the outdoor consumer units are the treatment. And one of the big things when you listen to all these health, podcasts, and like I have been on the way here, that's why I'm going down this road, is that we focus so much on improving the treatment without really, really addressing the cause. And I think if we address the cause, where we touched a bit on this with Damo on the heat pump one, if we address the cause of having space, having larger cables than a 2.5 mil going over to a garage, probably like a double garage or something like that, where they might even have 2 EVs in the future. If we address the cause, then the treatment kind of sorts itself out.
Yep.
And that I think is the big one that we need to do. And I think it was maybe on Damo's one where you discussed, Mark, about something in building regulations as to size of of area that we need, back of a garage. It doesn't actually have to be that big, but it just needs to be in an accessible place with access to an external wall, that all this kit can be put into. You can't drive people to go down the road of putting heat pumps in, EV chargers, solar, battery, God knows what, hydrogen, all this other stuff, without providing the space for all this kit. And I think that when you mentioned on Damo's one about the building reg side of things, I think that is the best route that we go down to get this sorted, really.
Yeah, definitely. That's the thing that everyone will listen to, won't it? Housing developers have to follow that, have to listen to it. That's what it's. Whether it goes to the point of dictating we want a 10 mil submain to every detached garage or not, who knows? That's maybe a step too far. But certainly where they'd put in there that there should be provision for an electric vehicle charge point in every garage space on a new build home, I think that's a fair thing to do. And also have interlinked smoke alarms back to the house as well, by the way, because they were missing as well. And the meter cabinet side of things, maybe accepting that in the 60s or 70s when they first became a thing, that they were a suitable size back then, because there was next to nothing in them, little electricity meter, and that was generally it. But now we've got smart meters, and there's other bits of kit in terms of switch fuses for submains and things. Maybe they need to be a bit bigger, maybe an innovation there that's double the size, or every new build has to have 2 meter cabs cut in, one for the DNO to use and one a space for installers to use who are maybe going to run heat pump circuits or EV circuits from there, just as an option. Or perhaps some sort of cabinet that starts getting fitted that you see traditionally on commercial jobs, where you'll have a feeder pillar at the end of someone's drive, maybe. I don't know, but again, maybe that's a step too far. But we need to think of some of these innovations, and there's definitely a space for these IP65 consumer units. There just needs to be consideration for how they're protected, and that should never be off a supplier's service fuse, in my opinion. And there should be elements of RCD protection in there as well. As long as we're covering those things off and we're happy with the temperatures and cable entries, there's a place for them to be used still. It's just not quite there yet. That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, I mean, this is the important thing, isn't it? That the consumer units that are being branded as outdoor consumer units, it's almost like the manufacturers are leading the design on that, because it's not for them to say that this is an outdoor consumer unit. It's like having a consumer unit that says an under the stairs consumer unit. It's not up to them where that goes, and that can be part of this deception, I think, really, as to making sure the wording is clear, that they are not introducing a problem just by what they're calling it, because not all installers want to be thinking about really intricate design and everything else. They want to just go do their job, fit the kit that they're given, and not really have to think about it an awful lot. And I think sometimes like I fell into, like the example I mentioned at the start of this podcast, that consumer unit that I fitted was branded as an outdoor consumer unit, so I fitted it outdoors. And then now that in hindsight, I'm thinking that should not really be outdoors without some, like you mentioned, Mark, about the heater and everything else and the other considerations. And that's something that I've kind of mulled over for a little while, and that's why we're changing what we're doing. Luckily, I've only ever done that twice, and one was plastic as a sort of progression through that. But it needs to be branded as what it is, which is an IP whatever consumer unit. And like I've mentioned on some of my stories about this on Instagram, is that an IP65 consumer unit has a place to be used, and that might be a workshop, might be a spray, a car spray shop or something, where you're going to be getting fine particles, and you're going to be getting maybe even splashes of water because they're washing cars or whatever. But that needs to be in the designer's hands, not in the manufacturer's hands. And I think this whole outdoor consumer unit thing is what has introduced the ability for these big energy companies to actually enter this market. Because if this had never entered the market, then the last thing that any of these big energy companies or manufacturers would want to do is start ripping people's floors up and everything, because they're just opening themselves up to an absolute nightmare of carpets being damaged, floors not going back down right, pipes being cut through. They're just opening themselves up to a massive headache. And that's why a lot of these companies have never been that successful in entering, there might be the heat pump market or the solar market and everything in the past, because they've just not wanted the ag of doing all of that. But now that this has been introduced, it's become an absolute, it's kind of destroying the whole solar and battery and EV and heat pump industry, because a lot of installers that have learned through their experiences and have really thought about it actually can see the dangers of fitting this equipment. And it's a really hard thing to do, because like you mentioned right at the top of the show, Mark, what do? Do you just let your business fail because you're up against all these other companies that are doing it, or do you do it until you're basically until everybody is stopped from doing it? And it's a hard fight to fight when you're seeing your work dry up because of it.
Absolutely. I mean, if you've built a business in that space and that's what you've been doing, I can't promise that I wouldn't try and fight back against some of those energy retailers who I saw taking food from my table by playing them at their own game to a point. And the design considerations around if they're safe or not, you can argue either way at the end of the day. So I can totally understand that, and there's no judgment on any installers who have been doing it from me. And there's a couple of other key points with you just mentioned around the terming of outdoor consumer unit. One's DIYers. These things are sold in like Screwfix, Toolstation. They're going to see that marketing and they're going to think, well, actually, I could put that on my wall outside and that'd do me just right for doing the garden lights or doing whatever. And do they understand some of the considerations? Are they going to be doing exactly what they should be doing with that? So there's the messaging around that as well, and also the duplication of this, because a lot of these products are built for just one circuit. I've seen an example of this just last week where there's two outdoor consumer units side by side, and there's a meter box just next to it full of Henley blocks to serve all this stuff. And that could easily be transferred inside that meter box as an IP65 enclosure without half those Henley blocks doing the same job. And is that worse? Just because the ENA is saying don't use the meter box space? For me, that's a better solution. Use the space. Yeah. It's something we need to get away from, I think, in doing the best design electrically and have less of these barriers from the ENA, from new build developers, and try and actually solve the problem. I think that's what we need to focus at. And there's a thirst for that in industry now. There's installers looking at this. I'm sure the energy retailers will be looking at it after articles like Craig's and other things that are coming from the likes of NIC and NAPIT. These things all tend to fall in line down the road of things as time moves along. So I'm sure we'll see that as well. So there'll be lots of people changing tact, and there'll be more innovation on products as well. I'm sure there will.
Yeah, I think the way that I can see this going, not really for EV, but certainly for solar and battery, and this might be EV might come into this as well, is I think the way that this will happen is the whole gateway side of things. I think what will happen is companies will basically go down the road of going, okay, well, actually then we're only going to fit a solar and battery system that has a gateway, because that has been tested, it's got the right circuit breakers in for the right environment. We are basically fitting that to manufacturer's instructions, that where it's got all the IP ratings, the glands are in, like you've highlighted, Mark, and actually then using that as your distribution board, because then that's different to you taking ownership of a third party device that you're then supplying an inverter. You're actually fitting all part of one battery storage system. Yes, you're still the electrical designer of that, but you are then fitting something that has all the circuit protection built in, and maybe that gateway has a spare way for an EV charger, because we can see all these manufacturers now are really feeding into that ecosystem. Give Energy have got their own EV charger. Alpha have just brought up their own EV charger. My Energy have obviously had the Zappi for a long time, but they've got the Libby. Solar Edge have got their own EV charger. There's all these places have got their own EV charging stuff, and I can see the ones that are really at the cutting edge will probably be looking at this going, well, all we've got to do is put another double pole breaker in that, RCBO in that, and then they can take their EV charge from that, and they don't need this outdoor consumer unit because we've got this gateway.
Yeah, I mean, at Solar and Storage the other week, every brand seems to have gateways coming now. And SIG Energy, that we install a lot of, already have that. Their gateway has 3 inputs, which you can put inverters into, but also take EV circuits out from. And their circuit protected devices they're using are 60947-2, so they're rated for pollution degree zone 3. There's account for heating and ventilation in there as well. And there's a product standard. I'm not sure if the product standard applies to the UK, in fairness, because it all gets very complicated with IEC standards for that. So as a designer, you can look at that product that's been tested for use in an outdoor environment. I can put that on the wall, and as long as electrically I consider the sizing of my cables because of that, I'm golden. I'm not retrospectively making holes in anything. I'm not selecting over current protected devices. I'm not choosing condensation glands that may or may not suit that size of enclosure. That's all been taken care of, and that's the way it's going. I know from looking at Give Energy Stand as well, to mention them, their new gateway, that has provision for taking EV circuits directly from it. The existing gateway does, but there's a bit of reworking that you need to do as an installer, but in the new one, it's factored in. And they've also got inputs for generators and stuff as well. So it's the way it's going. We're looking at different inputs beyond just solar, looking at air source heat pumps, EVs, and it's the innovation that's coming and the separation of product standards and wiring standards. That's where the confusion always comes from. It's when those two merge. We've seen it with RCD protection in EV chargers. We've seen it now with pen fault protection. And there's another conversation in the IETO 1 standard that's just dropped this last couple of weeks. Sam has another technical episode. And it's where that blurriness gets, that's where the problems come. So they need to be pulled apart.
Yeah, and I think certainly when I think about this outdoor consumer unit problem or discussion, or probably more of a diplomatic way to say it, is that you kind of think, okay, well, something will get sorted, and all these consumer units will be, will stop getting installed, and we'll look back on this as a bit of a blip in industry where maybe manufacturing brands kind of led the electrician rather than it being the other way around. But I actually think that mainly through the course of this conversation is that actually we're going to see more stuff on the side of people's houses unless the houses change, than actually seeing less of it. I don't think it necessarily will disappear. I think it'll just develop through innovation. We'll probably start to see a lot more gateways in. Whether or not we'll see little gateway devices brought out by EV charging companies so that you can just have, one of their own, consumer unit style gateway boxes that are all preset with their own, protected devices in, little heat, little condensate thing, and everything to actually allow you to fit all the glands and everything in already because of this conversation. We're maybe in just V1 of this conversation. We might just be looking back at that and going, oh God, do you remember when everyone was fitting those, metal consumers outside and they were drilling holes in the top, back, bottom side of it all, and now we're fitting these specially developed outdoor gateway boxes or outdoor, whatever you want to call them, or maybe just removing the outdoor element of it. I don't know, but I think all of that, the gateway side of things, the discussion I've just had there about, EV charger manufacturers developing their own stuff to allow stuff to go outside, all of that again is a treatment. And I think getting back to the actual cause of this is space in people's houses. I think, and also the fact that companies, as solar and battery and EV and heat pumps, even to a degree, become more mainstream, there'll be less specialist companies doing just this stuff, and therefore actually more product coming out on the market that allows for the easy route of putting something outside can almost rob food from your own mouth because you're not getting that distribution board upgrade. And does that mean that the standard of the electrics in UK homes drops because people are just ignoring what's already there, and all those sockets, lights, cooker, circuits and all of that don't get upgraded like they used to do because the only option was to upgrade that consumer to put that extra couple of circuits in?
That's such a good point. That is something that I'm sure is happening already. But the opportunities to make those recommendations and have some of those conversations will be lost because the designers, installers of the new equipment are just looking to solved that problem. You know?
Yeah, and I'll give you an example, Matt. Sorry to cut in there. So we because it's just come to my mind. So we priced for a project and we won it, and it was solar, battery, EV, and we also convinced the customer to upgrade their consumer unit because it was old. There'd been loads of amendments to it. It had loads of holes in it, plastic, and all this sort of stuff. And they were planning an extension. They were planning all this other stuff. They were going to get some rewiring done upstairs. They were developing the property, all this sort of stuff. And it was only in the garage, and it was right under where the battery was going. So we upgraded this distribution board, and we just unravelled problem after problem after problem with the wiring upstairs. Like the upstairs lighting, which had quite a few metal switches, but also had metal downlights, including the bathroom, loads of different things up there, and it did not have an earth to it. It had a twin and earth going up there. There was just no continuity up there, no R1, R2. So basically, for anyone not in the electrical industry, basically no earth connection, earthing all of the metal work. So effectively, if a metal part had touched that metal work, there's potential there for that light switch, that light fitting, when you go and change the lamp or the bulb in it, to give you a shock, depending on what you stood on and everything else. But there was just no protection there. So if we'd have just put our own little consumer unit in, that's another missed opportunity there for that home to be brought up to standard. And yes, when we were doing it, it was a pain in the backside because we were thinking, God, just coming back to this house again to redo this bloody, to fix these problems. But actually now that house has never been safer because we installed smoke alarms as well. So smoke alarms were installed throughout the house. The consumer unit was changed. The remedials were done. And yes, it's a difficult conversation with the customer to go, you know what, we found this, and this. It's an extra £1,000, whatever, to fix all those things. But now, like I explained to the customer, you can kind of make additions to this, and the next electrician that comes in, be it us or whoever, can look at that certificate and go, oh, fantastic. You know as well as I do that you go into a property, brand new distribution board there, spareways, AC surge protection there, mains isolator switch, all this other stuff. You see it and you go, oh, this is going to be a good job.
Living the dream.
But all that will happen as we start to, none of us want to do any of that work, is we just make this housing stock get older and older and older, which means the bill gets bigger and bigger for the customer down the road. But I totally understand why people don't want to do it because they're in the small percentage of customers that are actually recommending this work. And so does that then cost you the job because you've added an extra £1,500 or whatever for mains upgrade and DB upgrade and remedial works? It's like, it's a really difficult one to do, and there's not an easy answer to it, really. I think it depends on what your business is trying to achieve.
Yeah, and there's another conversation in that altogether, I think, to do with proposals and how you do have that discussion with customers. It's a challenging one. I think we've probably got to the end of the consumer unit one on this one there, Sam, I think this week.
Yeah.
So shall we wrap that one up? And
I think so. We need a break.
Yeah, we need a break. I need a cup of tea. It's absolutely freezing in here already. I'm not looking forward to December. It's going to be about -10. We'll both have frozen moustaches. But as we've mentioned earlier on in this episode, we are going to put some questions to Craig O'Neill, the author of that article. So please do get involved. We want to try and put stuff that's coming from our audience to him and get you involved with that chat we're going to have with Craig. So make sure you do that. If you've not already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel here. We are trying to grow it. We're really close to being able to monetize the channel, and every little bit helps us reinvest and try and make this better for you watching and following along. Give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If you've got any other comments about the discussion on outdoor consumer units that you don't want to put to Craig and you just want me and Sam to answer, drop those in as well. And massive thanks to everyone who's stuck with us for 6 months. It has gone way better than I thought it would, just to close out on that. And we have planned to make it bigger and better in the months ahead. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.